Hey friends, Joe Edelmann here with another tutorial video. You may recall the series that I did previously on how to play like each of Radiohead's 3 guitarists. If you haven't seen those videos, be sure to check them out in the links shown in the description. I decided it was finally time to round out the whole band collection and talk a little bit more about what I feel is so very special about the band's rhythm section, starting with bassist Colin Greenwood. Colin's bass playing is incredibly tasteful and displays a wide variety of influences from Motown, jazz, hip-hop, and beyond. I know Reverb did a very similar video and covered some great examples of Colin's playing and style, but here I'm going to dive a little deeper into what I see as the hallmarks of his approach and some different song examples from throughout the discography that help illustrate them. These 4 broad categories, which I'll organize the lesson around, are Chromaticism and Syncopation, leaving space and playing melodically, using pentatonic scales, and using bouncing octave and fifth intervals. I will link in the description the tab excerpts shown for these examples. If you would like access to full tabs and isolated tracks, please consider supporting me on Patreon. So the first element of Colin's playing that I'd like to discuss is his use of chromaticism, which we sometimes refer to as walking bass lines, and of syncopation. Chromaticism just means including notes that are not naturally part of a given key or scale as a way of passing between notes that are part of that key or scale. One of the most famous examples is what is called the blue note, which is the half step between the 4th and 5th degree of the minor pentatonic scale, also known as a flat fifth, or sometimes as the tritone. This type of chromatic walking can be heard to the extreme in the bass line for Paranoid Android, as shown in Reverb's video, but is also seen more recently in the song Deck's Dark, as well as plenty others. Colin's use of chromaticism is certainly part of his broader Motown and jazz influence, where these type of bass patterns are fairly common. Besides adding that funky flair from his choice of in-between notes, he also dresses up his bass lines with in-between rhythms by use of heavy syncopation. Syncopation is a big part of Radiohead's music, not only in Colin's bass lines but also in Tom's strum patterns and Phil's drumming. Syncopation generally means placing stress on the off or up beats of a bar rather than traditional strong beats like the one, especially when used in a polyrhythmic context. For example, if you remember the 3/2 piano polyrhythm from Daydreaming that I refer to often, the 3 portion displays syncopation relative to the steady 2 pulse, floating in the upbeats and in-between spaces before realigning every repetition. One of my favorite examples of Colin's syncopated bass lines is How to Disappear Completely. There's plenty of floating imagery evoked by that song, but the way that the bass line dances around the downbeats of the song's 6/8 drum and strum pattern is almost a sound painting of it. Despite the repetition of the bass line and other elements in the song, the syncopation helps break up monotony and add an interesting contrast and breathing to the rhythm. Interestingly, it actually creates the same exact polyrhythm as Daydreaming, 3/2, except it's in reverse. The drums and the guitar pulse are in 3, and the bass is floating and playing 2 dotted eighth notes for every 3 straight eighth notes of the 6/8 bar. One of the most important things that Colin does, that many great bassists who are considered tasteful do, is to leave plenty of open space in their phrasing, rather than just blasting out as many notes and ornaments as possible. While Colin does still have very active moments in his playing, like the famous Paranoid Android example, he's able to balance them well with more sparse sections. His most famous use of space in this way is probably Airbag, where he left actual silences he thought he might fill in later, but instead decided that the stop-start effect had even more groove. This, along with interesting scalar patterns and harmonic choices, leads his playing to be highly melodic, much like the great Paul McCartney or other compositional bassists. Many of his bass lines create separate hooks that you can isolate and sing along to. Now, two of his most famous bass melodies I'm leaving out here because they were technically composed by Tom, which are the National Anthem and Where I End and Where You Begin, but he still has plenty of other examples of this type of playing. Two of my favorites are in Weird Fishes, where he literally put a group of bass exercises that he was working on at the time into a practical application, and in Bloom, where he provided the main driving force to the song's polyrhythmic soup. Each of these makes amazing use of space. Another element in his playing that shows his roots in Motown, soul, and jazz music is his use of pentatonic scales. He's not alone in this, obviously, since pentatonic scales are all over modern and classic rock and other blues and jazz-influenced music. They're a cornerstone of most guitar soloing, for instance. One of the great major pentatonic lick makers to influence Colin is the Motown session legend James Jamerson. If you don't know who he is, I suggest you check him out. I can hear a lot of his influence in the ending section of the title track of The Bends, for example. Even with simple ascending patterns or turnaround licks, Colin adds similar soul to Radiohead's music, especially their more abstract krautrock or electronic-influenced jams that might otherwise come off as robotic or repetitive. To that end, I also refer to the minor pentatonic bass line of literal krautrock jam Dollars and Cents, which amusingly has a very similar cadence to the famous song Lowrider by War. Another theme and subsection of the pentatonic influence is Colin's use of two particular intervals, the octave and the perfect fifth. Again, these two intervals are included in both the major and minor pentatonic scale, and are huge for a lot of bass playing, not just Colin's. But he tends to use them in very effective ways, oftentimes bouncing between them to mirror and thicken Phil's kick and snare patterns. They're very good intervals for beginner bassists to focus on, since they are pretty much key agnostic and work well over a number of chord progressions. Fifth and octave bouncing is also a huge part of dub and reggae bass playing, which I know is influential on Johnny, if not also his older brother, as well as disco and electronic styles. Several Radiohead songs utilize versions of this technique, the most clear example being the bass line to Nude, which is entirely in octaves, as well as the bass line to Separator, which uses both octave and fifth interval jumps. There are many more, such as Spectre and Lift, that utilize these techniques. So hopefully these examples give you a good sense of the important features of Colin's bass style and why he's such a perfect fit for Radiohead's music. While Tom does play a mean bass guitar himself, as recently evidenced by the smile, Colin really inhabits his role perfectly and has contributed many memorable bass moments throughout the band's work. His versatility with different styles and techniques and his humble devotion to song-serving melodicism make him a great bassist to study not only for other bassists, but for guitarists and songwriters looking to up their composition game like myself. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I'll be back soon with more content like this. In the meantime, be well, take care, I'll see you soon.